Okay. So can someone name any few advantages of Java? Maybe Yogavashi, you can go with that.
Okay. As far as I know, but yesterday's class, uh, advantages of Java may be security because after creating a folder, it totally creates it for by folder where it is a machine only. It does a machine only reading, whereas it can't be hacked or it is secured. So Java is a secured framework, and also it is portable, which means like if a person, for instance, if a person is coding in a OS in Linux OS, and he sends up that code, that program to another person who is using Mac or Windows. The code is completely converted and easy to use. That is called portability. So uh, it is fine using it, and also you don't need any different software to compile, or you don't need to have an like application for it. For compilation alone, you can download JDK,
Mhm.
while for executing, you can have the JRE.
Okay,
So
I don't need that detail. You just tell me the advantage. That should be fine. Yeah.
these are the advantage as far as I know.
Okay. Yeah. So Kirba, can you just mention the three components of our JVM?
So JRE, Java Runtime Environment,
Mm-hmm.
JDK, Java Development Kit, and I forgot the third one.
Yeah, JVM is the third one. The three
Okay.
components of Java, JVM is also part of it. So, what are the two types of virtual machine did we see there?
Is it a question to me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So one is application virtual machine,
Mhm.
which is like JVM,
Mhm.
and one more PVM,
Okay.
and the other kind of virtual machine runs on hypervisor.
Yeah. So the basic difference between the VMs like
uh,
system VM and the application VM is the system VM needs a hardware completely defined for it, whereas application
mm,
VM we don't need any hardware to be defined
hardware
as the
installed.
resources.
Mm.
Yeah, tell me, Yogesh.
Yeah, that's what I'm just repeating yours.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So in your system hardware, you need to explicitly provide all your RAM details and everything as you configure your new laptop. Whereas in your application VM, everything will be provided as a software by the vendor where we download the software. So they will be providing that. So JVM would be a part of application virtual machine. Hypervisor, Zen, and other these frameworks are part of system VM. So you will learn about these in the later part of your containerization and AWS part. Okay. Next thing, so Chaitanya, like what is the command to execute, compile the code and to execute the Java program?
For compilation, it is Java C space and that Java file name which we write. And
Mhm.
for executing, it is Java space and that class file.
For compilation, do we need to have just file name or with the extension?
For compilation, do we need
File
file
name with an
name?
extension or just a file
No,
name?
that is not required. We can just give the name of the class.
Not exactly. So for compilation, we need to have the file name dot Java. And when you're executing, just your file name would be sufficient.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go ahead with JVM architecture. We'll continue further on that. I'm sharing my screen. So we have seen like there are like three main components for your JVM. The one is JDK, the other one is JRE, and the third one is JVM. So these are the main components. So how does this hierarchy works is first you write your source code, which would be saved in .java file. So as an end user, this is the first step you do. The second step is your compilation, which you do as Java C file name .java, which is your compilation. The third step would be your conversion. So after you compile, you'll get your .class file, which is nothing but your bytecode. So you receive your bytecode, which is nothing but your file name .class file. And the fourth step on this will be your JIT. I haven't touched this term yet. I'll just give you an explanation right now. So JIT is just in time compiler. So what does it do? That is the execution engine where we will be seeing about the third part, like how this particular execution engine works. That is the JIT compiler or an execution engine. This comes into picture here, and this will be executed on your JVM. And post this, we'll be able to execute our final product in our JRE platform, where application based, we just need to have a JRE installed in your system. So the final application running can be done if you just have JRE. And for all these three steps, right, you need to have your JDK. For the first three steps, you need to have the JDK. And the second step, you need to have your JVM. And for final application execution, you need to have the JRE. So the JDK, right? So we saw the virtual machine part. Now we'll be seeing that how this particular JVM works behind. So whenever you're trying to build one source code, any program, behind imaginarily, the JVM will create an instance for your program. On top of that, the entire architecture will be created. So we saw the first step as our class loader. So that is the place, that is the starting place where your JVM acts as entry point, where it gets your .class file as its input. So where we have three types of loading. One is your bootstrap loader. The second one will be your...
Hello, Sneha. Yeah, this is Jeevan. Sorry for today's delay. My office cab was late. I'm on my way to my room. I'm listening to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, is that okay for you?
Yeah. You can just be mute on yourself and you can listen to
it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and the second one would be the extension class loader. And the third one would be your application class loader. So what these actually does in your code execution. So the bootstrap loader is the one which loads your .class file. Okay. And for that, where does it load it from? So this gets loaded from a place called class path. Just remember this term. I'll be explaining the concept of it in some time. So we'll get this .class file from our class path, and who executes this? So in our structure, let me open the C program files, Java, JDK, and if I go to bin, sorry. So if you see here, you would be able to see so this is the one, the RT. So this RT acts as your main code to build your or to bring your load class to load your .class files from your class path. So who works on it is the RT jar. So what is RT? RT is nothing but runtime jar. So it's a jar. So if you see, that is an executable jar file, and this is the RT is nothing but runtime. So on your runtime, when you give the command java c space filename.java, immediately from your class path, this particular .class file will be loaded to your class loader. That would be your first step. And second step would be your extension loader. This helps you to push your code under JRE/live. So if you see in this particular one, if you see, we are under JDK, under JRE. So the JRE is two things. As a development toolkit, you will also have JRE inbuilt in your JDK component. As an execution of your program, as a normal JRE file, you will be having these files. So even here, you should be able to see the runtime jar. So right now we are developing the program. So we are looking into the JDK version. Under JDK, under JRE, under library, you are having the runtime jar. So this is the place which helps you to load your .class file. And this extension, where does it come from, is JRE/library path. So this RT jar comes from extension of your class loader. So it actually tells you that this particular class has to be loaded with the help of RT jar, which is in the path of JRE/library. And the third one is your application, which is nothing but the source code which you have written, right, which has been finally compiled to .class. That will be loaded at the application level for your syntax level compilation. So that happens here. Finally, loads your application. So this is the 3 types of loaders we'll be looking into. And this is the first step in your class loading, right? This part is done. Now we have the second step called as linking. So what does this linking does here? So what is its contribution here? So we know like the linking is nothing but basically to connect all your .class files to the final output. And that is what the linking comes into picture. So how does it does it? So first step it does is it verifies your .class. .class has the data of bytecode. So it verifies your bytecode data. The second step is it prepares your data for next level of execution. So what type of data will it look for? So let me take the sample program which we wrote yesterday. So if you see here, right now, I don't have any variables. I don't have anything. I'm just printing out a statement. Suppose if I have a variable, say int a equal to 10. So this is one of my variable. So what will this particular preparation step does is it will load all your variables, static variables, methods, everything, right? So it loads everything and allocates memory for those data. So basically memory allocation happens here for your variables or methods or whatever code you write in the entire program. That particular code memory allocation happens in the second stage of preparation. The third step would be your resolution, which is or a resolution. We can say resolve or resolution. So this would be the place where we symbolically reference all our .class files will be replaced with the actual method area. So this method area is something which you have noticed here in the runtime data area. You can see this method area, right? So this is the actual place where your entire code, piece of code comes into runtime execution and runtime memory management. And so far what happened is it was just setting up a platform for these steps. So basically in your linking, once your .class file is generated, you will be linking or you'll be using the bytecode data and based on that bytecode information. So what does this bytecode has? It has all your inputs which you have provided or used within your program, and everything will be preparing your memory location for each part of your programming things. And based on that, finally, it will allocate that and final memory part into your method area, which is runtime area. The third step on the class loading would be your initialization.
Sneha, can you repeat that method area?
Yeah, I'll explain the method area a little bit right now after completing the initial stage of class loading. So basically, to understand what this linking does is it will verify your .class file, the one which will be generated. This file, it will generate this file. It will read the data and it will understand like what are the variables you have used in this program. Since it's not a human readable format, all these details will be understandable only by the machine. So it will actually help us to read that bytecode data and provide the memory. So for example, if it's an int, you have to have a two bytes of memory. If you have a string, you need to have at least one byte of memory if it's a character. So based on your variable and the data, relevant data types and the methods, whether it's a normal variable. So I didn't go much into the syntaxes or the terms because I haven't used them so far. But basically, whatever piece of code you write within this block, for everything, for each term, if they are relevant to your Java libraries, it will actually allocate some memory, and that allocation will be happening in your linking phase of your class loading part. And finally, this method area is something which I'll let you know in another few minutes. So the initialization would be the last phase of your class loader, where it actually sets, like there's something called as static variables in Java. So just know this name. I'll tell you what is this in some time. So as you have seen in the Java file, you have observed a static keyword, right? This is a keyword. So all this is, which is highlighted in the purple color, are the keywords. So if I have a variable and if it is int, then this is a data type. And if I add something before that as a keyword, that is static variable. So earlier it was just a variable, int x equal to 10 was just a variable. But if I add a prefix with a keyword static, then it becomes a static variable. So as of now, you just know the difference between these two, that if you add a keyword, it becomes a static variable. If I use the same thing to a method, then it becomes a static method. So this is basically the keyword acts as a major priority wherever you use it. So in the final phase of your class loading, which is your initialization phase, all the static variables will be assigned with the actual values or the original values. And there's also something called as static blocks, and those also get executed. Executed is kind of not final execution, right? The .java project, but it will be like an ordering where you can say like this will be my first level of execution where this piece of codes will get executed. So in my code, this is the driver class, and in this driver class, there will be, so say I have 3 lines of code. So how does this order happens in your Java code? It always looks for your driver. And once you have a driver, it executes linear fashion, not in a parallel fashion, linear fashion. It starts executing your piece of code. And in this piece of code, whenever it finds your static related data, it executes them first, not the other details. So in my case, I have this as system dot, and I have this index and static. So among these 3, this will be the first one which gets executed because this has the keyword static. And as part of my class loading logic, the static variables and static blocks gets executed first rather than the other part of the program. So far you have any questions on the class loading? So basically the class loader is segregated into 3 phases. First, it loads all your .class files. The second phase in linking, you verify your bytecode and arrange your memory for it. And finally, in the initialization, you execute whatever you have seen in your bytecode format. So this will be your first phase. So far, any doubts in this section?
No, you can carry on.
Are we good here? So can I go with the second section, runtime data area?
Sure.
Okay. So in the runtime data area, this would be the major part to understand how the memory is getting managed here. So the first thing is, I just wanted to know, are you guys aware of the word stack? Like, have you ever came across the word stack? Normal in colloquial terms also you can tell me.
Yeah, yes, stacking up something in order. Yeah.
So basically, the stack is something you insert or you place it on one level on the other. For example, in school days, whenever we need to provide an assignment, we'll be submitting our books on one top of the other. But whoever submits first will be at the end, and whoever submits last will be on the top, right? So this is what a stack ordering would be like. So how does it go is, so consider this as your memory. Okay. So whoever comes first here would be here, and whoever comes last would be here. So this is this concept called as push and pop. In usually we use this term when we go with the algorithmic structure, push and pop. So what is push and pop? Whoever comes in and who want to retrieve the data, or you want to add those data into this particular box, right? We say it as push. So basically, if you want to add, you say it as push. And if you want to remove from that particular box, you say it as pop. So in our case, whoever comes in will be settled at the top, on the bottom of your branch, and whoever comes last will be on the top of the branch. This is what a stack is all about. So now coming to our method area. So we have something called as 5 major parts in a runtime. So how the memory gets allocated to your program and whatever you write. So basically there are 5 areas: method area, heap area, stack area, PC register, and native method stack. So before going to that, I just wanted to tell you one more concept, which is called as PC register. So I think you might have heard these terms when you are studying in your engineering or in the basics of computer programming, or to learn about your CPU. So basically in our CPU, we have something called as PC. Okay. So this PC is nothing but program counter. Okay. And there's one more term called as IR, which is instruction register. Okay. So what these two terms are and why we need to have a basic idea on these two. So whenever, so consider this is your CPU, right? Whenever you're processing if you're opening a Chrome or if you're opening a notepad, whatever action you're doing it, right? You need to provide an instruction to your CPU, unless then it will not process it. So how do we process that? So for that, we need to give us some input or kind of instructions to the CPU, like this is my first step, please execute it. On my second step, please execute this. So how does the CPU read that? So for everything, the CPU maintains something called as a memory allocation as well as the instruction register. So how does that look like? So for everything, you have something called as instruction register 001. This would be the first one. And let's say this is the one's instruction register with 004. And I'm just going only for 3 instructions right now, 008. So now for each instruction, this is just a memory address. I'm just writing a memory address which can be easily understandable. And for each memory address, you have some kind of instruction 1. You have something called as instruction 2. It might be anything, any kind of instructions, but the system will access through these instructions based on these memory locations. So by default, this will be your static or by the defaulted value for your CPU memory location. So this would be your first memory location to your CPU. So CPU has right now IR001. And every time when it executes an instruction, this program counter comes into picture and it tells you that you have to go for next instruction. And how should you go for the next instruction is, you have to increment your value with 1. So basically there will be multiple addresses and each address will be incremented by 1. So CPU is initially having IR001. So it takes IR001 and then it looks for the first instruction. It executes it. By the time it completes its execution, the CPU will have its next address as IR002. And if it doesn't have any instruction, it will go for the next. So for every instruction, it has something called as time slot. So it's a fixed time slot. So based on that fixed time slot, we'll be able to execute our instructions. Say for example, if your instruction is too large, but based on the time slot, it is not sufficient to execute in that particular time frame, we have to break down that instruction into submodules as a separate instructions. For that, only then the CPU will be able to understand and execute them. So the program counter is the one which holds your memory address of your next instruction. And the instruction register is something, basically the number of instructions which are present for your CPU to execute. So these are the 2 terms we need to be aware when we come into our runtime data area concept. So far, any questions?
No.
Okay, fine.
Sneha, just in simple term, like instruction register, I've understood. This program counter, it just provides a time slot, right? Like for
Yeah,
each
it's
instruction.
basically, you can say like modern digital clock, or what we can say like stopwatch. So for every
For
second, your
instruction.
count gets increased with +1, +1, right? The same way, whenever CPU is acting or on some work, its program counter works as like incrementing its value.
Okay.
It's basically like a time frame. So
Times. Okay.
with that particular time frame, it has to go for the next instruction and execute it. It's basically like a we would say like Pomodoro, right? Like within 45 minutes or within 20 minutes, we need to complete a task. So the time runs, and within that, we need to complete a task. So same way, the CPU works on the time, as well as it needs to know what is its next instruction and where should it look for. And for that, this program counter helps us.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So now coming to our method area. So method is something which is very understandable, because that is nothing but a function. So that is nothing but your function. So we have something called in this as class area. Okay, first thing, let me come with class. So what is class? You know, all your .java files will be converted to .class files, and every class file will be stored in this particular area. So we know we take the .class file as an input, but these input is not stored anywhere. So internally, these class files will be stored in your runtime data area, and this class area is stored here. Like we have multiple sections. So let me come to that little later. So right now I'll just tell you the words runtime constant pool. This is something we hear often going forward. And we have something called as fields. We have something called as methods. We have something called as constant areas. Okay. So how does this work when we write a program? So right now I have a code as int x equal to 10. So in this, x is just a variable and I'm assigning a value of 10. So we call this as a variable or a field in terms of Java. Next one, let's say I'm having a function. So I'm using this x as a function and I'm incrementing its value by 1. So I'm writing a method, say add by 1. And I'm passing this input as x. Okay. And what should it return? It should return me some again int value. So I'm writing as int. And here I'm having a logic return x plus 1. So this is my logic. So this is nothing but a method or a function. Okay. So this is something we mention it as a method in our class area. What is the constant? So we have something called as constant. Like you don't want to change its value until you complete your program. So for example, say like whoever comes in whoever logs into the Zoom, till then I have the count as 0. So I want to initialize my count as 0. Okay, so no one has logged into Zoom so far, so it is 0. But when, at a time when someone comes in, logs in, I want to increment my value with 1, right? But I don't want this particular count is a dynamic value where it's getting actually changed. But in my case, this value, I don't want it to be changed. I want it to be a constant. So in C and C++, we have something, a keyword called const. But in Java, we don't have this keyword. Instead, they have brought something called as final. And we just mentioned that as final here. So this is something, the value never gets changed. So whenever you do this, the value will not be updated because it's a static value. So it's a constant. You can't upgrade this value. It's anytime it's 0 only. You can't change it. So those are called as constants. So we'll understand each keyword as we start learning the syntaxes and the actual definitions. But right now, to use a constant in your Java file, you need to know there's a keyword called final. And there's also something called a static keyword. Those are called as static, that can be used to your variables, that can be used to your methods, and that can be used to your classes too. And the final one is runtime constant pool. So where does this come? So whenever, so far you haven't learned about object, you haven't learned about classes. It's a basic term. So you have just learned what is a variable and you just saw how to define your method. That's it. You didn't see an object creation. So what is an object? So let me tell you, like any real-time object. So if I take laptop has its own attributes and its own functions, right? So maybe can anyone say me like what is the attributes of a bicycle and what is the function of that bicycle? Can someone share me some inputs on that? So basically, what is a bicycle? Okay, don't go to bicycle. Let's take smartphone. So for a smartphone, what are the attributes? What are the major object things we look for a smartphone? Not its function, but the inputs or the actual characteristics of a smartphone. What would you say there? Can someone say?
Performance, accessibility, durability.
Model number, size.
No, you're wrong, Yoga. I'm just asking you the parameters of the mobile phone. That's it. I'm not asking its features.
When we are going to
Okay,
select
okay.
a mobile phone, what are the things we will consider?
Yeah,
That's the question, right?
yeah, exactly.
So RAM, camera, spec, screen size.
So you can say memory for RAM, yeah, and then camera specific issues. So I'm just giving camera. I'm not going much detail. Okay, next.
Screen size,
Okay,
Model
battery,
number.
okay,
and battery size, like battery spec.
okay, battery. What else?
HD mode or full HD mode.
Yeah, HD. But that becomes more of a feature, right?
Okay.
I'm just asking. So for example, if you take
The
a
RAM.
human, you say
color.
eyes, ears, face, hands,
Yeah.
legs. These are the characteristics of a human, right?
Yeah,
Same
yeah.
way, what are the characteristics of a mobile?
Color.
Internal memory,
Okay. Memory is already RAM we have, so I can just rename as memory. Okay, what else you can say as a characteristics for a mobile? That's it.
Brand.
Yeah, model number. Okay, you want brand, but that is more specific to mobile levels. I'm just asking mobile characteristic, not as a number of mobiles characteristic. Okay, so we have sufficient input. So let me go here. So these are the characteristics or the states of the mobile phone, right? So now tell me the features or the behavior of this particular mobile. So what is the use of this mobile? So what are the usages you have from mobile? You can talk, you can send messages, and you can take photos, and what else?
Play games.
Okay, games.
online
So
class.
basically play, okay. But that is more of a software, right? I'm asking is a mobile aspect. From what is mobile giving you? The main feature of mobile.
Store documents.
Okay, store. Okay, storing data. Okay. What else you have as a feature? You can charge your phone. You can hear or hear your songs or whatever you can hear from mobile. Right? What else you have as a feature? Like something it behaves, and that is so for a human, I can say I can eat, I can talk, I can walk, I can sleep. These are my behaviors. So as a phone, what will be the behavior for that particular mobile?
Contact a person.
Contact would be more of in deep, that would not be a feature. So that is what we generally say is talk, right? What else
Yeah.
you can say?
Browse.
Okay, and internet connectivity you have. So it provides you internet connectivity. Yeah, then okay. So now you understood what is the state and what is the feature, right? So these are something we use often as a variables in our object-oriented programming. And these are the one we use as our functions or the methods in when you write a program. So how do you write it? So let me create a one more structure. Say right now I'm creating the model or the object for mobile. So let me keep my class as mobile. And here I always need to have a main class, but right now I'm just telling you what is an object and what is the behavior of that object. So that is what I'm just doing. So it's just an example for you. So I'm just saying a model number. So I'm just saying model number can be alphanumeric, right? So I'm just taking model number. Next you mentioned what? Memory. So memory can be an integer. It's a numeric value. So I take int memory. Next. And you mentioned camera, right? Whether it's a front end camera or a back end camera, you need to have the pixels value. So let me take again it as an int. I'll say front end pixel value, and I'll say back end pixel value. And okay, I'll just take these 4 attributes right now. So these are the mobile attributes. So this is nothing but how you define in your program when it comes to as variables you use them. So these are the state of the object. Now, coming to behavior. So how does it behave? It helps you to talk, right? So to call. So that is one of the feature you have in to call. I'm not giving anything inside. I'm just giving the method definition alone. So you can do send message, right? And to take pictures. So what else you have as a behavior of a mobile phone? You can just tell me as a verb or an action which you can perform through mobile phone. So to surf browser, right? So every action of that particular object comes into your behavior. And that is, we call it as a method or a function. And this is what you define in your class structure. So this is an object. So an object is something, a real-time object, which we use in our daily circumstances. And we wanted to use that in our programming structure. Right? So this is what your structure looks like. And all these details would be saved in your method area or this runtime data area section. How does it save it? So there's again something called as heap and stack. So as you know, this is the stack, right? So whenever we need to access that object or the information of that object, we need to say, you have multiple mobiles. So I just created a random structure of this. It's just a blueprint of my mobile phone. I don't have anything. It's just a template. So if it's an iPhone, I have the same template. If it's a Samsung phone, I have the same template. So if it's a normal basic model phone, I have again the same features, right? I don't see the brand here, but I see the features and the state of that particular object. So this is nothing but a template or a blueprint of that particular object. Now, to say like I'm using iPhone, I'm an iPhone user. And what if you are a Samsung user? You need to be very unique on that mobile phone, right? For that purpose, we say we need to have an object, a relevant object. And how that can be created in terms of your Java programming is you have a definition or a syntax to create your object. So this is a definition. How does it go like this? Class name. And you should have some reference name for it, equal to new is the keyword again. And you should again go with a class name followed by parenthesis. This is the syntax to create your object, right? So in our case, right, we used mobile as our class. So how do you create your reference? Can someone say me now? For iPhone user, I want an iPhone user object. So how do you say? This is the syntax. Class name is your mobile. I need a reference name. New
iPhone?
Class name. Yeah. So I'm going with iPhone. So I go with iPhone equal to new mobile. Right? This is one object for my iPhone. What if I need to create an object for Samsung phone? How should I create it?
Mobile Samsung.
Yeah. Equal to new mobile. Right? So whenever you create this object in your backend, you get, this is, let's say this is your stack. Okay. And now here I get my iPhone location. So I created an object, right? So now I has iPhone memory here, iPhone related details here. And next section would be my Samsung. I'm just giving you in a linear fashion, but usually the data will not be saved in a linear fashion. It will be randomly generated and randomly saved. So you never knew where your data is, but you should know that it is again in a stack, but not in which address. Somewhere in the stack, your data gets stored, your object gets stored. This is what your object gets stored into your stack. Okay. So now coming to your heap. What is this heap? Heap and stack both are same. They hold your data. But the thing is, what kind of data they hold is the difference between the stack and heap. Okay. So to make you more clear, the stack will hold all kind of static variables. Okay. So basically in your program, right, where we created int x equal to, int a equal to, right? So all these data, so instead of here, let me say instead of Samsung, I have my x, I have my a. All these data will be created in my stack. All the objects, whatever you create as a syntax, using the syntax which you created right now here, right? All this will be stored into your heap memory. So heap is the place where your instances, so whatever reference you used here, right, iPhone, that can be called as a reference, or you can call it as an instance, or you can call it as an object. So don't get confused if I'm using any of these names. All are same. So the iPhone is an instance of this particular mobile phone, and a Samsung is this. So what I can do is this iPhone, for whenever I'm writing an or creating an object for iPhone, I can give like the model number is iPhone 13. I can give a memory of 64 GB, and I can give front end pixels of 16 and back end pixels of 32. So if I'm going with Samsung model, say Samsung Note, then I'll say the model number that, and I can go with the memory. So for each object, the characteristics, the state values are getting changed, but the state of each mobile is same. The values are different, but the state is same. So this is what you need to understand as a basic level. What is an object? What is a state of an object? What is the characteristics or the behavior of an object? And once you know this, and where do they get stored? In your heap memory. When you create an object, all your iPhone, Samsung gets stored in your heap, and all your variables, right? So this is again a variable in terms of class. So this variable gets stored in your stack as well. But the data which you provide as part of your iPhone, right? So iPhone's memory, front end pixel, back end pixel, these are the parameters of that object. All those data would be saved in your heap, but the reference alone will be saved in your stack. Okay. So all the reference variables, X, Y, Z, whatever you use as a variable name, right? Those all reference will come into your stack. And whereas all your data, whenever it's getting created as an object, all those will be created into the heap. So far, any questions?
So variable names are stored in stack, variable values are stored in heap.
Not variable values, object values.
Okay.
So all your variables will be like just an input, right? So those will be saving into your stack. Whereas all your object relevant details will be saved into your heap. So I can show you an image for that. It should be helpful for you to understand. So if you see, my local variable a is equal to 10, right? This is getting stored here. But how does this get stored? A is a variable which gets into my stack, and the value, whatever you create as an object, right, that gets into the heap. So all the variable references and that information will come into the stack. So any doubts you have?
Okay, what is the difference between variable value and object value?
So when you're doing it as an object, the back end, the data is, so how your memory gets created, right? So for usually whenever you are creating any variable in the backend memory system, how does it get stored? So let's say I have a memory of 10 bytes. And now I have created two variables, say int x equal to 2. This is my, as per the code, I have given this. So what is int? Int is a data type which can hold 2 bytes of information. Okay. So in my total 10 bytes of information, I am segregating my 2 bytes to my x value here. So my x value which is equal to 2, comes into the 2 bytes of memory. Right? This is what usually your variable gets stored. But where this variable gets stored is in terms of Java architecture. In our architecture, in the runtime data area, your data gets stored in your stack area. So it's just a variable. Right now, if I'm creating an object, say mobile, and I'm creating an object as iPhone equal to new mobile. Okay. So sorry if I'm overriding the data. So right now, this is an object, and this particular mobile is a customized class I have created by myself to make use of the logic or to use in my use cases. But nowhere this particular mobile has any defined byte. It is undefined. It doesn't have any value as you have in your int. Right? Int is defined by Java that it should have only 2 bytes. Whereas in your mobile, you don't have any byte reference. So you don't know how much bytes you need to allocate for your mobile phone. So that place, your heap data structure comes into your picture, and it tells that I'm okay to take your object. I can store you and accommodate you how much data you use from me. I'm okay to give you that. But in terms of stack, it is very limited. You can increase the stack and heap values dynamically also. But in the initial phase, the stack can accept only the defined values, okay, defined references, but it can't hold those memory. But in case of heap, it is ready to hold the values, how much you put into it. It's basically like a garbage where you can push until it exceeds and comes out. Unless it throws you a heap out of memory error, I'm okay to hold all the data with me. That is what heap works like. Whereas in stack, it tells like I have very limited data. I can hold your references. You can give me any number of references because that is predefined, and only here and there you will be giving me the undefined variable names. So I'm okay to take care of it, but I'm not okay to store the reference or the values of that particular references in my area. I basically like, this is a registry, like in your Aadhaar card, you can give me your address, but who stays in your address is the number of persons, and that is very limited. That comes into the heap, and the address comes into your stack. Clarified, or you have still queries?
Somewhat clear.
Okay. Others, you have any other doubts?
It's okay for me. When you given working example, like you can.
Yeah, I'll give you the working example. Right now, this is very basic idea. Why I'm saying is like to understand how your program works, like you should know like where your data goes in at least. For that purpose, I'm just giving you a basic idea on each terminology. What is PC? What is program counter, and how does it work backend? What is a heap and stack, and what it's stored in the backend? That's it. So these all things you will know, and you can debug them with the libraries which is provided by the Java. You can have all those libraries in your JDK. So in the JDK library, you can go and play with this and can identify how your bytecode is segregating your data. There's something called as Java P. This can actually disassemble your entire bytecode class and tell what is your method names, or what are the methods, what are the variables, what is your class, and what are the static variables, and what are the constant variables. Everything it can segregate you and tell you in the .class format code. So basically, you will try to learn all these libraries, and post in each section, you will be able to use them and assess yourself like how in the backend the JVM architecture is working for you to provide you a final output. Okay, so let me quickly go ahead with the other few terms which I haven't covered. So basically, I can say in a very simple term, the stack is a static memory location. So it can't take much details. So it is always constant. So it can take only this many details. Whereas heap is dynamic and it can take all your instances. Okay. And when this heap and when the stack gets created, when you're doing this particular piece of execution. So right now we saw this class loader, which happens after doing your compilation step. And all this happening only in your compilation phase, right? Till you execute your final Java space file name, until you come to that command, all this is happening in that particular phase. So how is this class area is happening? How these values are getting stored there? And you right now you need to know like when the stack and heap gets created. So the stack is something which stores your static information, and that gets executed only if a thread is created, and that is a private thread. Okay, so in your case, if you're creating an iPhone, right, this particular iPhone is something you created right now in your program, and whenever you create your iPhone, immediately the heap will be created in the backend. Whereas in int x equal to 2, when you're writing this, your heap will not be created. Only your stack can hold this reference as x, and it can have that value. And only when you execute it or when you use that particular x as part of your code piece, then only heap comes into picture and considers that I can use this x also in my memory or in my place. Until then, I won't use this x. Whereas if it is a mobile or any kind of object, I'm ready to take it. That is what heaps architecture is all about. So this is dynamically created whenever you create an instance. Whereas in terms of stack, only if you try to use me, I'll consider you. Otherwise, I'll not consider you. That is what the behavior of stack and heap when it comes to your architecture. So the next one would be your final execution engine. So I don't want to go with the other terms right now. So you know what is method area. So the method area is the one which holds all your functionalities, what you write, right? And how that static method or a normal method or an object method, how does you hold it? All those details will come into your method area. And heap area and stack area is like internally your fields and your objects, whatever you create, gets segregated under these two areas. And the PC register is the one which tells your CPU that here our CPU is nothing but JVM. So which tells the JVM that you have to execute this instruction. So in your piece of code, whatever you write, so basically each piece is an instruction to your CPU. So it executes each line of code, and all these lines of code getting executed with the help of your PC register, which is program counter register. And finally is the native method stack. So if you are a C++ or a C developer and you wanted to write some piece of code in that particular language and you want to execute it behind that purpose, then this native method stack can help us there. So we'll see that little later. Just understand this is basically native to C language. Now in terms of execution engine, these three are the main components. So what can you learn? What can you get it from the word garbage collector? So what is actually bringing you, or what kind of thought you get when you hear the word garbage collector?
Unused memory, something like that.
Okay. Anything else?
So it clears the memory.
Yeah. Good. Anything else?
It stores up memory. I mean, it stacks up memory inside it.
Not
Like
exactly.
that.
Deleted objects memory.
No. Like kind of okay. But what exactly it does is it actually deletes the memory. What kind of data does it delete is something you need to know. Say example, in your piece of code, you created mobile iPhone and you created mobile Samsung, but you didn't use this particular object in your entire code. You just created an object, but it's unreferenced. So you're not using it anywhere. Okay. So it's an unreferenced value. But as a developer, you should have not created it, but you did it. Okay. But in garbage collector, what it does is it will look into your entire piece of code and sees like what are the relevant variables, what are the relevant methods. Okay, do I need to have the memory for this particular variable? Yes, I'll create a memory. If I do I need to have a method for to call and have a memory for it? Yes, I'll do create it. But when it comes to this object creation, this is actually gets created in your heap area, but you never used it in your entire program. Then the garbage collector comes into the picture and says, you created it, but you're not using it. Why should I save it in my costly memory called heap? So I don't give you the allocation for your Samsung in my heap. So the garbage collector comes into the picture and says, you can delete the Samsung because that is not being used by any of the piece of instruction in your program. So you can delete it. So this is done automatically by the garbage collector. So you can manually do it, like explicitly, you can put a pressure to a garbage collector and say, please delete all this information. You can do that. And implicitly also your garbage collector does it without giving any instructions by our program. So that is what the garbage collector does when it comes to your maintenance of your memory. And what is this interpreter and what is the just-in-time compiler? And how does that actually act when we are doing this particular final execution code is something you need to know. So the interpreter, so what is an interpreter? You have learned, you would have heard the word of interpretation, something like that, right? Often in your any kind of books, somewhere you read, right? What is actually interpretation? So basically, interpretation is something to execute one by one. So wherever in this particular initialization, you had that the static blocks gets executed first. So where will the other piece of code get executed? That gets executed here in your interpreter. So this particular one reads all your instructions one by one and executes you the final output. So why did this interpreter didn't work in case of Java, and why we got this called JIT compiler is there is a problem happened with the interpreter. So the interpreter is like, say example, now I'm using a mobile phone. I'm saying to call. I can call X, I can call Y, I can call Z, I can call to 10 members also. But whenever I'm calling, I'm again using the same method to call, right? The same method is being used multiple times, right? So whenever the same method is used, what is internally the interpreter is doing is it is creating as one more new instructions. Actually, the call is only one method, and that one method instruction has to be executed by only once. But when it comes to an interpreter, it was executing how many times you call the call method, it is executing that many times. And this was actually lowering the system's performance. So if basically, you know, add is going to give you the final result set. And if you test it only once, that should be sufficient. But in your case, the interpreter, what does it is if you're using Samsung dot to call, you're doing it for the first time. Similarly, you're doing for multiple times. And every time the interpreter is thinking like it's a new instruction and it's not able to consider this to call is something I already handled it for the first time. And it's not a new, but it's taking it as 6 lines of instructions and it is doing the same instruction in loop continuously where my performance is getting reduced. To avoid this, the Java framework has brought something called just-in-time compiler. So it is a tool which can actually collect the unused materials as well. And it can actually detect what is the unused and what is the used. Okay. And it reads all your bytecode information and it compiles it to a machine readable format at runtime using your runtime jar. So this compiler compiles all your final bytecode which you have extracted from this path, class path. Everything will be compiled and read instructions one by one. And it also improves your performance because it already has an executable jar handy. So you don't need to write your piece of code for your execution. It already had it handy. So that is why your number of lines of call method will be only called one time here and not multiple times. So the behavior is only one, but you're invoking through the same object again and again. You're not doing any change. But what if I had something called int person name, right? So every time I'm calling, I'm changing the person name as X, I'm changing to Y, I'm changing to Z, right? So maybe in your contact list, you might have this number, or sometime you might not have the person name. You might need to create a new contact and then you have to make a call. So there's some kind of a function again added there, a behavior added there. So in that case, JIT will be able to understand the behavior and reduce the performance and not exceed the performance than expected. That is why we use this just-in-time compiler in our architecture to make our bytecodes compile easily. Okay. And the final one which you saw here as the garbage collector is something we can also manually execute it manually from your piece of code. You can actually say like, I want to shut down my system. Just go system.exit. That's it. It will delete the entire garbage collection from here. So whatever you want to crash a system, right? You just need to use the system.exit. If you write this line of code, your Java program will start and it will shut down, will start and will shut down. So basically to shut down your system or to close your garbage collector, you can go with this particular piece of code so that your system will not run. It will be like shut down. So this is what the architecture looks like. So basically, so far you have any questions or can I summarize? So you understood this, right? Or you have any questions? Hello? Am I audible to you?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. Yeah, you have any questions so far?
No questions.
Nothing.
Maybe I think we have to read what it is again to understand more deeply.
Yeah, so I suggest you to go through the website called this one. So in your docs.oracle.com, you have the entire information for your Java, and whatever things you wanted to learn, you have everything assembled here in a more detailed way. Right now, we are looking in the basic Java structure. So don't go under 17 version, which is latest. So I prefer you to go to the basic Java 5 or Java 8 related information and just have a look on it. And even you can go to any documentation. I suggest there's a book called as Complete Reference for Java Guide, where you can have, it's a complicated book. I can share you the PDF as well, where you can read the entire analogy of this particular JVM architecture. But basically, as a fresher of one who is learning, you don't need to go much deeper, but you just need to know what is what, at least what this loading is does. It loads your .class file. And where does it load from? That information should be sufficient. So all these information, what is what and what it does, what is the main functionality and what kind of data it stores. So these information should be sufficient. And more things on this and the design patterns, when you start learning after some 30 classes, you will get a better understanding how your architecture actually works than on your second day. So just if someone asks you what are the basic components of your Java and how this backend code works on, you just need to tell this class loader, runtime area, and execution engine. And your JDK and JRE, what does it do? That should be sufficient enough to start with. As you write basic piece of code and when you start improving your coding practices, you will be able to understand all these terms and how internally this works when you write few logical programming or using some data structures. Unless then, I don't suggest you to go in detail with these terms. Just understand what is heap memory and what is stores. It stores instance. What is stack area? It just stores the references. That's it. That should be fine for you right now. And as you start coding with those algorithms, you'll understand in a better way. Without, I don't need to explain. You can learn it by yourself.
Okay.
Okay. So I just wanted to extend few more minutes on your installation part. So that you can try when you have time tomorrow. And if you have any difficulties in installing, you can ask me in the tomorrow's initial session. So what you have to do is I'll just share you a few links where you can actually download your Java relevant dependencies. Please copy this URL. So I can open this. So basically right now Java is with upgraded version of Java 17. So Java 8 is a 2014 release, but most of the companies are using right now that as a basic version for Java. But we have Java 11 and we have Java 14 too. But to start with, I suggest you to install Java 8, not before version, so that it would be compatible for you to learn and practice Java 8 as well. So go with Java 8 and whatever operating system you have. If you're a Linux based, please download the relevant Linux tar file. If you're a Windows system, try to download the relevant Windows exe file. So the steps you need to do when you install is, you need to download this particular executable file. I'm just telling it right now for Windows. Do everyone have Windows operating system or is someone having a different one?
I'm having Mac.
Yeah, you do have a Mac related OS. You can just download it and install it in your system. Okay. So basically there are two things, JDK file and there's a JRE file. Please don't install JRE since you are going to develop your programs in your local. I suggest you to go with JDK version. So if you see there are JDK 8, so this is all JDK 8. And if you scroll a little more down, you can see the JDK 201 versions. I suggest you to go with the latest version in the JDK 8, which is available in this particular archive file. So go with JDK 8Q202 file and just download it. After installation, if you double click on this exe file, it will create few pop-ups where you have to give next, and it will ask you a path where you have to install. So I suggest everyone to install it under the root folder, or if you have any separate folder, you can install there. You try to install under the program files. And in that, try to have this Java. If you don't have Java folder, try to create a new folder called Java. And within that file, try to install your JDK. Just do this alone. I can tell you the setup next steps by tomorrow first session, and we can start doing the programming with basic knowledge, whatever we learned. So just try to install, have this install. To install this from Oracle, you need to have an Oracle account. So try to enroll yourself in your Oracle website, register yourself, only then you'll be able to download it. Once you download it, just extract that particular file in the program files under Java. So only these steps you need to take care. Post that, what are the steps and what is class path, what is path, and everything you'll be learning by tomorrow. So the complete environmental setup, you'll be able to complete it by tomorrow and create one sample program by yourself. So any questions so far on installation, where you need to download from? Hello?
No questions.
Okay. So let me summarize quickly on that. So I can share you these whatever content, the class materials we are using right now, right? Whatever I'm typing here, this would be shared. And same way the video recordings, unless if you need, you can ask and take it. If you have any doubts, you can, or if you have not present on that particular class, you can ask for the recordings and take it. Apologies because yesterday I couldn't take the recordings of yesterday's class. From today, you'll have your recordings handy.
And also please share that book that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'll be
Complete.
sharing it over the mail, the reference material, and then the link, the actual link. So right now I just opened the Oracle documentation. I'll give you the actual reference link also in the same email chain for you to go through the website.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have two joinees like who didn't join in the yesterday's introduction class. We have Priya and we have Janaki. So Janaki who enrolled for morning batch, and Priya is one who joined today. So let's quickly have an introduction about themselves and we can wrap it up for today. Yeah, Janaki, you can just give an introduction about yourself.
Hi all, I'm Janaki. Actually, I'm working in old technology, so that's why I just want to upgrade myself. So I've enrolled in this Java. So I have 6+ years of experience in the IT.
Yeah, thank you, Janaki. And Priya, could you please introduce yourself?
Hey, hi. I was not working in a couple of more than a couple of years now. I just want to restart my career, so I just want to learn some basic languages from Java, like Selenium.
Okay. So what was your previous work experience?
Yeah, I got 2 years of experience in IT as a tester, but not completely with the coding.
Okay.
I'm completely new for the coding.
I hope you like this coding soon.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we have other few members. Kiruba, maybe you can just give a short introduction.
Okay, so this is Kriba Shankar. I'm working as an data warehouse developer in Society General for the past 2.5 years. And I'm also working on backend only. So I just joined to learn Java and also develop an e-commerce website with the help from Sneha. So that's it about me.
I think the others are have disconnected. So we can have their introduction by tomorrow if required. Yeah. So far, any questions, or we can wrap it up for the day?
No, I think everyone are in the call.
I see only 6 participants. Is Yogavashni and Jeevan are in the call?
No, they
Okay.
are
Okay.
Yeah, I think they have logged off. Yeah, so fine, let's wrap for the day. So I'll be sharing you the materials of yesterday's and today's and whatever class materials, and I'll be sharing it through a Drive link. So you can have your reference, everything there, and you can check it over there. So we'll have everyday session materials updated in the Drive. I can share you the Drive link once it's done.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good day. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sneha.
Thank you.